I've been talking about this for 20 years. The same story. Nothing's changed. I ask people to come and see the police report. Nobody wants to see my police report on my reserve. Why? The truth is there.
More than 4,000 Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and trans people have gone missing in Canada over the last 30 years. Both inaction and action, rooted in colonialism and colonial ideologies, are the driving forces contributing towards this amount of disappearances and murders.
This is a crisis. People are going murdered and missing every day.
There's been multiple reports, recognition, and calls to action to address the ongoing genocide of Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and trans people.
You know, there's more and more missing and murdered Indigenous women, and so much money has been put into this, millions and millions of dollars, and recommendations after recommendations and more recommendations.
Many say that not enough is being done to actually implement tangible change. But could this change?
The House of Commons unanimously backed a motion declaring the deaths and disappearances of Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and trans people a Canada-wide emergency. The House also supported funding a red dress alert system. This would be an amber alert system specific to Indigenous women, girls, and gender-diverse people that have gone missing.
I think it's about time that the government has a red dress alert. It's an issue that the governments, all level of governments, including the authorities, have not taken seriously. They just, they talk a lot, but there's no specific understanding of what the issues are, the fact that Indigenous women are being targeted by not just serial killers, but just in general. And so the issue of racism needs to be addressed, and I think it's a brilliant idea.
The National Inquiry's report admits that it's not possible to establish firm numbers on exactly how many people are missing.
Families are having to do it on their own because they've stopped doing the searches if someone's missing. There's just so much that's needed for the families who are having to live through it on a daily basis. It's trillions of dollars that they need to put back into our communities in order for us to regain and revitalize who we are as a people.
Gladys Tolle was struck and killed by a police officer driving a cruiser in Kitigan-Zibi, Anishinaabe in 2001. Only 20 years later did her family receive an apology.
Police ruled Tolly's death as accidental and closed her case a few months later. Her daughter, Bridget Tolle, has been tirelessly fighting for justice for her mother, citing that investigators weren't transparent and missed important details in the case. Bridget told Local 514 that she experienced difficulty accessing the police report and wasn't told that the investigation was closed, but instead learned this after a journalist contacted her.
Last year, we had Government of Quebec, Mr. Ian Lafreniere, and representatives from the Public Safety and the SPVM Montreal. They all came to my reserve to apologize to our family for the way we were treated that night my mother was killed. And the Kitigan-Zibi police, the cousin of the cop that killed my mother, he decided to go to a graduation instead of coming to the meeting with us. And our chief of police don't show up. Since then, they don't talk to my family. We don't know if we're getting services or what's going to happen if we call them. There's no accountability.
Local 514 reached out to the Kitigan-Zibi police force, but didn't receive a response before the publication of the story.
This is hard to deal with when you see it every day. And this is what I see. And it's hard every damn day. So I'm sure it's hard, for other families that do not have truth, accountability, and or anything, can't even get a police report. Like I said, I was very lucky to get one. If anybody wants help or any kind of way, the first thing you do, and the sooner you get it, is that police report. Then you'll see for yourself what's in it, what they did, and who was there.
Local 514 reached out to the Sûreté du Québec to understand how they respond to cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women. A representative said that there is internal training that exists for all members of the SQ to handle Indigenous-related issues, educating officers to understand their realities. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommended that Canada implement 94 calls to action. Today, only 13 of these calls have been completed. The final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls was released in 2019, including 231 calls to justice. Since this report was released, Indigenous women continue to experience the same rate of violence. The calls to action address education, prisons, access to healthcare, upholding culture, justice, and more. Activists and families say that many of these calls have gone unanswered. Local 514 reached out to Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller, but we were not granted an interview. However, we were provided a statement. Isabel Buchanan, the communications assistant for the Office of the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, said that addressing calls for justice and putting an end to the national crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit trans people is not a linear process, but it is clear that they need to do more. She added that this work requires all levels of government, and Minister Miller has established a permanent national roundtable with Indigenous leaders and partners, and federal, provincial, and territorial governments, with a second roundtable coming up in fall of 2023. But some activists say that there isn't enough action being taken on all levels of government.
The recommendations, I think, just fall on deaf ears and stay on shelves. And it's Indigenous people, actually, that are actually saying, you have not respected these calls to action. It's only when we bring it up that they actually do something, or Indigenous MPs.
Here in Cabot Square, we've seen the repercussions of violence on the Indigenous community. There's been multiple vigils and marches commemorating the lives of those who've gone missing or been murdered. This is a stark reminder that the situation is far from being solved, and action needs to be implemented immediately.
There's been enough inquiries. There's even been provincial inquiries on the justice system, on so many issues. All they need to do is implement them and put the resources into all of the calls that have been made.
This situation may make you feel hopeless, but there's lots that you can do as an individual to implement change.
Speak out against the violence that Indigenous women, girls, and gender-diverse people are subjected to. Read the calls to action published by the National Inquiry and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Learn about Canada's colonial history and push for local, provincial, and federal politicians to implement these calls to action. The genocide of Indigenous people stems beyond missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and trans people.
Residential school being one of them, right? That's the root of a lot of the violence in our communities, is because of the enforced genocidal policies of sending our children to residential school. And so what are they doing in order to rectify the harm that they've done? Where are the systemic changes? Whether it's education or legal or social systems, right? Those are the real shifts and changes that need to happen. Not just throwing money somewhere and thinking that's going to help.
There's interconnectivity between all of these issues, which is the ongoing colonization, erasure, and genocide of Indigenous people.
We're not going to move forward unless we have some accountability and truth. So this is why I'm here, and I'm still going to speak out till I drop dead. Because, you know, I don't want my grandchildren or the next 7 generations to be treated like this.
An apology does not resolve the problem. Monetary compensation does not address the problem. It doesn't take away the hurt. What really needs to happen is a mind change, and a positive mind change, as we say in our language. You know, or have a good mind, and I don't see that in Parliament. I don't see that in anything that I've witnessed, whether it's provincial or federal.